Welcome back, guys, to Chess DNA, and in today's video you're going to witness a spectacular game of chess played between the two of the legends of the game. Anatoly Karpov is taking on the great Garry Kasparov in the 1990 World Championship match. So this is game 17. Karpov is playing white pieces, Kasparov has black pieces. So let me give you a little bit of introduction of who these players are. I mean, of course they don't need any introduction, but still. Karpov is known to be the best positional player of all time. He was just a phenomenal positional player. He was known to use all the 64 squares of the board. Sometimes he would just come up with some really creative maneuvers that nobody else can think about. And Kasparov is known to be literally the best player of all time because of the longevity he had from 1985 to 2000. He was a world champion, and the great Magnus Carlsen himself acknowledges that Kasparov is the best, so the debate is over there. But Karpov was also a world champion for 10 years, from 1975 to 1985. And these two guys had a peak of rivalry between two. It's like Manchester United playing Manchester City, if you guys have interest in football or soccer, whatever you want to call it. But this is just like that. Amazing rivalry. And this game is a positional masterclass by the greatest positional player of all time, Anatoly Karpov. I saw this game, I felt so enthralled, and I decided to show it to you guys as well. So I hope you will enjoy it. So without wasting any more time, let's dive right into it. The game starts out with d4. Kasparov replies with knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3. And Kasparov was known to be the greatest King's Indian player. I mean, he always opted King's Indian. He was just playing it every single game. So Karpov was probably expecting King's Indian here, which would have happened after bishop g7 and e4 d6. The pawn is on d6, you castle the King's Indian defense. However, there was a surprise. Kasparov here plays the move d5, dodging the King's Indian and going right into the Grünfeld defense, which has a reputation of a little bit more positional, and it's not as aggressive as King's Indian. So you're just fighting Karpov in his home ground, positional. It's all what Karpov wants. So let's see how Karpov punishes Kasparov for playing the Grünfeld against him, going into his home ground in a positional battle. So first of all, you have to take the pawn. That's the mainline Grünfeld theory. Knight recaptures, and then this e4 move challenging the knight that sits nice on d5. Knight takes c3, b takes c3. Now we get this characteristic Grünfeld pawn structure when white is just controlling the entire center. But black's idea is to play c5, knight c6, and bishop g7 and start putting pressure on that d4 pawn. So bishop g7 first, Karpov plays bishop e3, and now c5 by Kasparov, and the battle starts around the d4 square here. Here's a surprise, queen d2, which is not a main move in this position. You usually want to play bishop c4, black would castle, you want to go knight e2. Usually the knight goes to f3, but not in this situation, because then the bishop g4 move is going to pin the knight down, and the knight will not be able to defend the d4 square anymore. So knight e2 is played in this position, knight c6, and then you can simply castle. There is this bishop g4 move, knight can go to a5. Let's say you play f3, knight goes to a5, attacking the bishop on c4. So bishop usually sacrifices itself on f7 with check, rook takes, and then you take the pawn, and the theory goes on from here. You want to take back with a king. Knight does get a nice square on c4, queen goes to d6, rook comes to f8, and there's so many games played in this position by a lot of grandmasters. But Karpov here actually had something else in mind. He did not go bishop c4, he goes queen d2, and the idea is to place the knight on f3 so the bishop cannot come to g4, pinning the knight down as queen has moved to d2. Castles by Kasparov, knight f3, bishop g4, but here's a novelty. Knight to g5. Now, what is that move all about? So he wants to provoke some kind of weakness with h6 so that he could bring the knight back and then target that h6 pawn with his queen bishop battery. So Kasparov actually takes on d4, Karpov recaptures, knight c6, putting more pressure on d4, and now h3, asking this bishop, what are you doing here? You want to stay here or you want to go back? A question for you guys, where do you want to put that bishop? So there are so many squares, not so many, but you have c8, d7, e6 square, but if you put it on e6, knight takes. If you put it on c8, nobody wants to undevelop that bishop. So Kasparov moves the bishop to d7 by the process of elimination. Rook to b1, attacking b7, and you can pause the video and try to find a very nice move here by Kasparov. How would you solve the problem of the b7 pawn, which is under attack right now? So here we go. Kasparov here plays rook to c8, welcoming Karpov to take the pawn on b7. Now here we see the greatest attacking player. I mean, you might put an argument that no, you're wrong. Tal was the greatest attacking player of all time. Okay, I agree, but Kasparov was no less than Tal. He was a very sharp, aggressive, dynamic player, and he welcomes Karpov to take the pawn on b7. Now, what's wrong with taking the pawn on b7? Karpov does not take it, but what happens if he takes it? So again, I would like you to pause the video and think about it a little bit. What would you do if Karpov against you takes the pawn on b7? As black, what would you do in this position? Okay, so what Kasparov had in mind was this beautiful knight takes d4 move, bishop takes, queen takes on d4, and there you see the disadvantage of not castling early. The queen was the defender of the c1 square, but now rook can swing in with a check on c1, and if you go to a light square with the king, then bishop b5 check picks up the queen, as you can see now. So maybe king d2. But here's another killer move in this position. Rook to d1 check. If you move the king away, you're just simply losing the queen. So if you take the rook, the king is on a light square. So bishop a4 check is going to guarantee the queen here. So you can't take the bishop with the queen because it's a pin. You can't take the queen as there's a check. So white is just simply losing the queen in this position. So for that reason, I mean, Karpov, of course, he was a great positional player, but he was also a very good tactical player. He saw all through these tactics and did not take on b7. He simply replied with knight to f3, guarding the d4 pawn, and now reinforcing the threat of capturing on b7, because now the knight is going to end up on d4, as in the previous line we saw the queen ending up on d4, which was undefended. But even the queen can end up on d4, but it will be backed up by the knight. So now Karpov is really threatening to take on b7. So what does Kasparov do here? He first of all moves his knight to a5, protecting the pawn on b7. Bishop to d3, simply developing. Bishop e6, castles, and now Kasparov's idea is to crash in on that c4 square. So bishop c4. So Karpov improves his rook, brings it to the line in which the queen is sitting. b5, cementing the position of the bishop. Bishop g5, kind of attacking that pawn, pinning that pawn down so that it's not allowed to move to e6, as Karpov would love to move that d pawn forward to d5 in some situation. But here a6, just very, very solid play by Kasparov here. But now, finally, when his development is complete, Karpov improves that rook, puts it on the open file because its job is done from b file. It was attacking b7. There's no more pawn b7. It's a very strong pawn on b5. So the rook was silly, so he moves it to c1. Kasparov initiates the trade on d3. Karpov first trades a pair of rooks and then recaptures, and then rook to e8 as the pawn on e7 was hanging. And now Karpov seizes the control of the open file on the board, rook to c1 attacking the queen. You might think, what if Kasparov just actually goes rook c4, knight c4 in this position? Karpov would play knight d2, and this knight is under too much pressure. It's a pinned piece, and you might have heard about put pressure on the pinned piece. So here we get that idea in play. So of course, first Kasparov moves the queen to b7, and now he's threatening to put the knight on c4. Not really threatening, but that is his only good positional idea in the position. So Karpov here plays d5, actually controlling the c6 square, creating an outpost square for his rook in future. Kasparov goes knight c4, and Karpov immediately challenges that knight by bringing the knight back to d2. So if you do nothing, then you're simply losing the knight and the pawn, as there's too much pressure on c4. So Kasparov has to take the knight on d2. Bishop takes back, rook to c8, fighting for the control of the c file. But here Karpov crashes in with rook c6, and that's where I would like to just tell the beautiful quote by Bobby Fischer: tactics flow from a superior position. So whenever you have a superior position, you can sense it. Tactical resources should be working in your favor in these kind of situations. So Karpov would love to put the rook on c6, but if you put the rook on c6, doesn't the rook get traded simply? But no, if you take the rook, pawn takes, attacking the queen, and also there's a check on d8. The bishop can go to h6. Let's say you take the pawn, boom, check, bishop f8, bishop h6, it's over. So you cannot allow that. So the Karpov's positional rook c6 move is backed up by some beautiful tactical resources. So that's how beautiful it is. Okay, so what does Kasparov do? He first of all improves his bishop to e5 so that bishop can watch out for some of these dark squares on the queen side, but now simply asking that bishop to get traded. So if you take that bishop, Karpov would love to take back with the queen and double his influence on the c file. Again, if you just try to neutralize the pressure by taking, you can just simply take with the pawn, or even with the queen, and that queen is so strong you cannot take it, as the pawn will be a couple of steps away from promotion, so it's completely losing for black. And what else to do here in this position? Kasparov actually just moves the bishop all the way back to b8, hoping for some, some chances to survive here, but really Karpov is having a phenomenal position. How to continue the attack here? The greatest positional player of all time plays queen d4, threatening a checkmate on g7, provoking some of the weakening moves like f6, and you will see why this is going to be really, really vital a few moves later. Bishop to a5, putting the bishop on a better square where it is controlling these crucial dark squares. Now he's looking to seize that c7 square for his rook. So now bishop d6, stopping any kind of queen c5. If you play bishop e5, let's say queen c5 is going to threaten the rook. Again, you can't take because queen takes, take, and then that pawn is again unstoppable. So for that reason, bishop e5 is played, and bishop d6 is played, and Karpov just plays queen c3, again putting a lot of pressure on the c file here. Rook has to move away. You cannot do anything. You're threatening to just take that rook, so rook goes to e8, and now simply a3. Karpov sees that Kasparov is completely tied down, does not have any moves, any good moves to make. He does not have any plan. So why not just consolidate his position a little bit, improve it to the maximum before, carrying out the final operation. So bishop, king g6, g3, just, he's threatening to slowly push this pawn forward, bring the king in, and then he is going to operate on the queen side with his final decisive attack. Bishop e5, he goes queen c5, and h5 by Kasparov, a final mistake here, because now bishop to c7, asking for the trade. You cannot trade that bishop, otherwise the rook goes to c7. So bishop to a1, and now bishop to f4, stopping the bishop coming back to e5, and now queen d7, and now rook to c7. The rook lands on the c file, and whenever the rook lands on the c file, it's usually just game over. So Kasparov here tries rook d8, queen d8, and then d6. Finally, you see that weakening of the position that Kasparov did a few moves ago comes to bite him back. Now d6, finally with a decisive blow, you cannot take its pin, and after g5 attacking the bishop, simply d7. There were so many ways you can even sack that bishop, and that is also just winning, and then you can play d7, but immediately d7 is also just sufficient. Rook to f8, bishop drops back to d2, and in this position bishop e5, rook b7, and Karpov can sit in this position all day and enjoy and torture Kasparov. And in this position, simply Garry Kasparov resigns. There's nothing else to do. If you move the queen away, you lose that pawn with check. And if you move the rook, there is just even bishop takes g5, and then you lose that bishop with check. Such a dominating position, and you guys see how beautifully Karpov handles the positional aspect of the game. Seizes control of the open c file, plays d5, controls the c6 square, makes it an outpost square for his rook, then lands the rook on the c6 square, backed up by tactical resources, and then at the right moment, before crashing in, he first consolidates his position, slow improving moves, and finally the d6 decisive blow, and it's over. So that was a spectacular game. I hope you guys will appreciate it, because in order to become a stronger player, you just don't have to just appreciate the tactical and the attacking games. You also have to appreciate the positional games as well, because some of the masters just spend their entire lives showing us how it's done. And we have to appreciate the play of Anatoly Karpov in this game, and I hope it will really, really help you improve your positional understanding of the game as well. I hope you guys enjoyed it. See you in the next video.